Welcome, everybody, to the show. We have a fantastic episode today. We have an excellent guest on here. This is a man that started the Balance Media. This is somebody who created Weathered for PBS, and his new documentary, Elemental Reimagining Wildfire, is coming out. Can't wait to talk with you all about this. Preston, I know you're excited. But first, let's start at the beginning. Where did you trip, Jennings? Where did you start? Where did you get that spark to make documentaries?
Oh, to make documentaries in general? Well, okay.
Yeah, in general.
I was I was really into whitewater kayaking. Um, Running rivers with like big rapids, big waterfalls, and I was like sort of a pro kayaker. And I was traveling all over the world and exploring new rivers that had never been paddled before, which is a very niche and sort of funny part of the adventure sports, realm. And making videos about it, like a surf video or a skate video or a snowboard video. And honestly, I was just like I was paddling past these amazing places and noticing that they were changing. Paddling through pristine landscapes and then mined or logged or dammed or whatever. And I was like, wow, there's a story here in every one of these landscapes. The people, the environment, this is all changing. And I have this crazy view of it, like this weird perspective on it. And I was just like, I feel like this, I just feel this calling. I feel like this need to go deeper than just an adventure sports film. And I was just so curious. I was so curious about everything I was seeing. And I wanted to bring that to viewers because I felt like every part of this world, there's this fascinating story of change. And that's what you get to do as a documentarian. You get to just dive into these topics and become extremely nerdy and way too detailed and way too knowledgeable for, chatting at a cocktail party about. So you got to find an outlet for it, I guess, right? So here we are.
No, here you are with Elemental, and I'm curious. I mean, from rebuilding a mountain and postcards from climate change to Elemental reimagining wildfires, when did you first pick up a camera? Because I mean, I feel like Elemental belongs in an IMAX theater. Like it's beautiful. When did you first pick up a camera? Because like some of these shots you got were impeccable.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so back to the kayaking story. I was like 15, I think, and my high school girlfriend's dad had a little camcorder, which I borrowed, and I put in a dry bag that you could put in between your like knees, basically in a kayak, and I started just like taking it on the river. And I don't think he knew we were like taking it in the water, but and then we started using like my buddies and I started using two VCRs and and a CD player to like overdub the soundtracks, and we just started like really early high school just nerding out on cameras and shots and editing. And then I started editing on the very first version of Final Cut Pro. Um, yeah. And I quit editing when we had to transition to Premiere. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not moving from Final Cut. This is the only thing I've known. So yeah, that was how it all started, and just I could just never put a camera down, honestly.
You had to be like an amazing teenager to have your girlfriend's dad trust you that much with equipment to go out, right?
No, but again, like I don't think he knew. So which makes me the opposite, not an amazing
Not a
teenager.
great teenager.
An irresponsible teenager. Yeah. I think I was kind of I mean it was borrowed, but I don't know if it would have been consensual had he known.
Well, he knows now, maybe.
I know, right? Mr. Clark, if you're watching, thanks.
Yeah. I wanted to get a little more specific about your film here. So it's so great how your film beautifully shows all the culturally and scientific methods in place to help prevent wildfires, from experts experimenting on houses. Like, man, I had a really good laugh when that one guy said, "I love burning houses down," because it was so unexpected for how serious the subject is.
Yeah.
But I get it; it's really funny. But you also show, like, to people using fire to reset the lands, as they say in the film, to have them in better shape than they were before, essentially. So it's a lot of comprehensive analytical thinking that gets down to the bare parts in a way, and gets us thinking about how everything works in a system. Has this thinking rubbed off on you in any peculiar ways where you now think maybe a little more comprehensively or systematically?
Yeah.
Whether that's other serious topics like wildfire, whether like food sustainability, or how you approach filmmaking in general.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I think are really true about not only wildfire, but really about like what we need to learn to sort of shift in our society to just make things work a little bit better. Like the biggest thing that I got out of Elemental that I bring with me is, we just have these sort of stories and narratives that have been handed down for a long time about how we do things. And with the new challenge of a warming climate, so many of them are just not serving us, right? And we have to kind of come up with this new thing. But so often our first sort of let's try this out. Okay, we have this new problem, let's try this out. People have to come up with that. People have to come up with the first idea to adapt to a new climate and new challenges. And boy, it's fascinating that like so much of what we do takes us in the wrong direction. And we really need, that's why we leaned into the science in this one, is that we really need sort of this big data. Like, we don't have hundreds of years or thousands of years of experience living in this new climate. So we need to look at, okay, if we really need to figure this out, we need to not have our sort of narratives and our preconceived notions clouding our judgment. So we do need this science. We need peer-reviewed science to help us figure that out. But to balance that out, we need the 10,000-year-old, many generations deep understanding and relationship with the land that indigenous people like the Yurok bring to this film, right? So I think that combination is like a very powerful way for us to guide how we live into the future, right? We've done a lot of great technological advancement in the last 50, 80, 100 years, and that's great, but I feel like it's become sort of like ungrounded in some ways, right? So we do need that science, and we need that history. We bring together the new science and the old knowledge. I think we can really, I think we have something. I think we can really like move forward in a way that will work in a hotter, drier world.
Yeah. How did you make the science digestible for as a viewer? Because as you said, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of things there, but I mean, for me, it comes through your specificity as a storyteller, and also just allowing these subjects to just talk about their processes, show us how everything's done and how they've been doing things, and that sort of thing. Was that something that you kind of picked up on to lean into, or is it something else altogether different?
Yeah, I mean, how do you make highly technical interviewees who are the smartest in the world on their subject? How do you make that consumable by everybody? Honestly, a combination of things. And I think this is super important for making a film work, but just the trust that we developed over the years with these interviewees, because I don't think there's anybody in the film that we didn't interview multiple times over the course of years of my changing understanding of this topic and idea. And so you just do build a relationship. And that allowed me to say in post, like, hey, I think this is what you're getting at. I'm gonna like get pretty surgical on some of your interviews to simplify things in a way that I hope you're comfortable with.
Right.
And I wouldn't do that on a news interview because I don't think it would be true to the subject. I wouldn't do that on a interview that I didn't, an interviewee, or on a subject I didn't understand really deeply myself. And I think we came out with something that the subjects, that the people who are in it feel great about. You know, we haven't had any scientists say like, oh, you misrepresented me or anything like that, right? People are just really, they see the film and they've really gotten behind it, which is great. But it's a risk, right? We kind of were like, can we push what you said a little bit like this just to make it make sense? And then of course, it's very difficult to get visuals that really describe some of these detailed things. And we had to think for so long. So we didn't want it to all be animations. We wanted people to see the real, like seeing is believing. But it's hard, you can't just say like, oh yeah, there's a lot of wildlife out in Burns. You know, we had to spend years out there with camera traps, trail cams, long lenses, sitting in blinds, because we wanted to show people what we're talking about, you know? It's like, no, there are real baby fluffy owls learning to fly in trees that are burned. Because that changes this cultural story, this long held story that we have, that like burned landscapes are destroyed. Well, not if you're one of these birds that needs a burned landscape to build your home and get your food. And so let's show that.
Yeah. So what was it like being in the elements when you have, the subject's stories, in the back of your mind, and you're like, oh, this aligns perfectly, or
Yeah.
I fully comprehend what they're saying because I got to see it myself.
Oh, the experience, like I've always loved being in nature. Love just being in big trees, whatever, forests, waterfalls, mountains. But the deepened understanding and the experience, of like hearing these interviews and distilling this information, and then finally being in that place, you put yourself in that place at that moment when this exact thing is happening, and it's just like it all comes together. And it's, I'm pretty serious when I'm filming. Like I don't emote too much during the thing because like usually there's something that's only happening one time in my life that I have to capture. But then afterward, it's just like, it feels so good. But I'll tell you what feels weird is there's the dark side of that. The dark side of that is I have learned so much about how homes burn down. And I don't always have, and we, even firefighters, don't always have the capability to prevent that, as we go through in the film very clearly. And so sometimes I've worked very hard to put myself in a situation in which I am witnessing someone's life being ruined.
Right.
I'm witnessing their home catching on fire in a way that I now have learned is extremely predictable. And, I can't prevent it from happening. All I can do is document it. And it's terrible. Like I hate it. Like I'm wearing my helmet and my goggles and my face shroud covering, and I'm just like crying behind that because I'm watching someone's memories just poof into smoke, and it's awful. But I need to be there. Like I feel very strongly that I need to be there because we need to see it, because seeing is believing. We're not going to believe it until we see how embers get into a house and burn it down, and we lose the house, and we lose that family's memories, and it resets that family's life for like 5-10 years. It's awful. But if we don't learn from it, it's just going to happen over and over and over again. So
Right.
so that's, that's awful. Every shot of a house burning down, I cried during,
Yeah, I can't imagine that, and having to get that on film. Which leads me, I'm curious, Was there a moment on the set of this film or while you're filming over the last while where you kind of had an outer body experience where you kind of said to yourself, this is something special, this is something good?
I mean, I just watching those owls, those little owl. I mean, there's just like these little puffballs, right? And here's the story behind. There's some shots of owls in there, baby owls, mama owl, and that shot actually took almost 2 years to get, because I went to Yosemite, outside of Yosemite, but nearby, to film this shot of a great gray owl. It's the largest owl. There's this very endangered, very small population of them in that area, and a friend had told me that there was an active nest. I was going to get this rare birds, young, being raised, and I got there, and that bird had been hit by a car and died. And I was so sad. And I was actually on assignment as well for National Geographic to go get some. This was one of the things I needed to get footage of. And I just searched and searched and searched through the burned landscape, and I found, on like my last day, I was walking up this creek and sitting and calling, to see if a spotted owl would call back. And one just landed on this branch like 30 feet away from me, and after dark, so I couldn't get any footage. And I was just like, oh my God, that's awesome. And he started calling woo, 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 at me. And but I had to leave because it was schedules. Came back in the fall, and I found the same owl. Didn't have to call this time. He just came down and he basically followed me around his home as I was walking through his forest, and got a bunch of great footage of him. And then the last night I had to leave again. I'd been there for like 6 days, and as I was leaving, I could see him on the branch in front of me, and I heard another owl call back to him as I'm walking down the hill to leave to get in my car and drive home. And I was like, I bet they're courting each other. So I came back in the spring, and sure enough, they had a nest. And so I followed that nest for like another 3 months, 4 months, until I got to film these little owlets literally taking their first flight. And that moment, I was just so in it. I was like, I'm in this burned landscape. I've had this like relationship with this owl. When I walk up the hill, the owl comes down and says hello every night. And now I'm like filming his babies just like fly from the nest for the first time. So yeah, that was a pretty spectacular moment.
What a fantastic story. It's like brings a smile to my face and get a little lump in your throat. You're just like, oh, like the unspoken relationship between maybe man and nature is just, it's there, and it's there in the documentary.
And this teacher, right? Because we believe, and as I believed, that a fire comes through a landscape and it's destroyed, right? And there's the wildlife is gone, right? And this owl is here to tell me, no, you're standing in a fire. You're standing in an area that was burned. My nest is in an area that's burned. And I go to this area to hunt because it's better for hunting. I've chosen to be here. And so that owl was like, just in that moment, what a cool like lesson that it was showing everyone, it turns out. Everyone who sees this film.
No, that's super cool. And hopefully you got some really cool photos you can put in like a photo book for yourself, of those owls throughout the stages.
Yeah, they're really cool. It's hard to get them though, because I was filming on a Red, which was I wanted to do as much, on that camera as I could because it was our principal camera. But it's just not, spotted owls don't come out until dark, basically. So it was very hard to get footage at the right time when I could actually film them through that camera. So yeah, it was there's less footage than you would think for a story that I followed for a year and a half.
Right. No, that's great. And I have to ask, we were talking about earlier about all like some of the smartest people in the world on these subjects you have in your documentary, showcasing the science, showcasing actual footage of what works and what doesn't work. And so throughout your career as a documentarian, from like climate change to weather to elemental, um, and you having these access to scientists, how do you tackle the naysayers to stuff like this? Because there's always going to be opposition. Like, is that something you encountered throughout your career, and how do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's, I'll just lay it out. Like for this film, we're basically saying that, we put 90 some percent of the dollars that we spend on preparing for wildfire, it's almost all spent on vegetation management, right? So that means cutting stuff down, bringing it out of the forest, bringing it out of the wildlands, grasslands, shrubs, before it burns. And as we say in the film, that's our principal tactic for reducing fire risk. And if we just cherry pick one span of years between 2004 and 2018, there was a 10,000% increase in homes destroyed, right? It's a little bit less extreme if you sort of average the trend, but the trend is still extreme and terrifying. I mean, that is a pretty clear indication that we are not winning and that what we're spending our money on and doing isn't working. I think anyone can look at it and see, with exponential increase in home destruction and exponential money spent on it, on preventing it, we're getting a failing grade. We've got to do something different. But there are good, smart, well-meaning people who spent their entire careers testing the first hypothesis that if we bring more stuff out of the forest, if we cut trees down, we burn grasslands, we make fire breaks, all of that, if we reduce fuels, we'll increase safety. That was the first hypothesis. We spent 30, 40 years on that hypothesis. It's wrong. It doesn't work. We can see that clearly. But there are good, smart people who tried their best for their entire careers doing this. It is not easy for them to say, I was wrong. Let's move on. How can you ask them to do that? I'm not even asking them to do that. And those folks are, can be very oppositional, and they're upset about this film. But we can't just not make the film because we can't say what's true and what's, just sort of reasonable and rational. I think if you just look at the issue, we can't shy away from that. We have to take it head on and say, how do we live and thrive in a hotter, drier world? And this is how we do it, right? And so, yeah, I think that is the scientific process. You come up with a hypothesis, you use all the smartest people out there to test it. And if it fails, you go a different direction. And we honor the people that came before us, and we move on. And it makes me sad when there are people who are still holding on to a previous narrative that is not working. But look, I'm here for it. I researched this. I can cite everything in the film to a scientific paper. Like, this is the start of a conversation. Come to our screenings. Public forums are great. Maybe not social media. There's a lot of nuance here. But I'm here for the conversations. Let's start them. Let's have them. Because we can't keep having as many people die and lose their homes as we're currently having. It's a failing grade.
I wanted to touch on something that you actually touched on earlier, which is, seeing the families go through the rubble and everything, but more specifically about how you open the film, which already puts emotional hook in you, seeing this family with their own cell phone footage going through the fire, not being able to see anything, commenting on how hot, and you can feel it. You can feel the heat in the moment of how hot it's probably in that car with the kids in the back. and saying like, oh my God, there's tires blowing all around us from the other cars that are surrounding us. So you can feel the intensity and the emotional intensity of it. And so I'm just curious about starting with a moment like that and how that set you up tonally for the rest of the film.
Yeah, well, I mean, we gave away a little bit of the end at the very beginning. Before that, even though, right? Because Jack Cohen starts the film and he says that, you know, it frustrates him to hear a fire professional say that nothing could have been done to prevent the disaster in paradise, because it could have been. There are
Mhm.
things that could have been done. And then we see this contradiction and this juxtaposition of people having the most terrifying moment that I can ever imagine. I mean, since starting this film, I had a kid. I have a 2-year-old now. And hearing her say, I was just trying to touch my children because I thought it would be the last time I'd ever, I mean, like, I'm like choking up right now. You know, I can't even imagine. And to me, this juxtaposition I mean, that's the reason that we made this film. No one should have that experience ever again. And we can build and we can modify the way that we live to prevent that. And we should, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that changed. That moment represents the experience that so many people in the fire community went through, which is, oh my God, we've seen what the worst modern wildfire disaster looks like. We have to now make sure that never happens again. We have
Mhm.
to be turning the tides, and instead of continuing to see, you know, exponential destruction, it's got to go the other direction. And so the whole film is basically, from that point, it's just saying, okay, so what are we doing now? Is it working? I don't think so. So how do we change? You know, so we had to. I felt like we had to all get on the same page. You know, which is that, like, no mother, no parent ever should think that again,
Yeah.
because we have the potential to change it, and we will.
Yeah. As well as you articulate all this information, and allow me as a viewer to feel the same emotion, just as you were saying, like you identify because you're a parent too. I do the exact same. Everything that I watch it through the lens of my kids, and it makes me want to have greater understanding and do better things for my family. And so, as well as you do communicate all that, is there perhaps something about this film or this subject as a whole that I will maybe never understand unless I'm standing in the shoes of those experts or you yourself, because you got to experience all these things that we don't get to see in a film, like these little,
Mm.
probably really great in between moments when you're talking with the subjects where you may have something that's even that you can't perhaps show us.
Yeah.
You got to experience it and feel it.
Well, I
Without
mean, even with a film like this, it's deep, right? Like, we didn't shy away from, you know, sort of honoring and including the complexity and the nuance of fire.
Mhm.
But there's just so much more. I mean, fire is this, you know, it's this fickle, sort of just unpredictable in many ways, and you know, the deeper you get, the more you realize it's sort of like we'll never fully encompass. You know, we would need like a series of feature films to get sort of all of the nuance. And so I think it's interesting. Like, I think this is true about um, a lot of problems that we face in society. In order to, you know, when we're at this precipice of like, which way are we going to go, or you know, are things going to keep getting worse or get better? We need to understand more deeply. For me, I need to understand deeply in order to change, in order to believe that the change that we're doing is the right change. So yeah, so there's like so much stuff that I wish we had been able to cover, right? Like, I mean, you know, we could have gotten far more into this idea of like, you know, especially for you all in Texas, this is important. The majority of homes that burn in wildfires are not in forests, but we call them forest fires still. It's like our understanding has to change. Y'all are in, shrublands, grasslands, and there's still tons of fires in Texas and tons of homes lost, right? We can't leave you all out of the solution, right? And so there's just this nuance, right, that I would love to get into. But honestly, I think in like 5 years, 10 years, looking back, we'll all be like, we didn't need all that nuance. If we had just been able to be like, oh, just build homes different and modify the ones that have already been built, like that's really simple, right? but in order to get there, yeah, there's just so much nuance that I'd love to go into. And of course there's the different ecosystems, and the way that fire plays out in different ecosystems is another thing I would love to communicate, and get into more deeply. But like, is it important for the way that we really need to change our relationship with fire? I don't know. Maybe not. Southern California, Chaparral, it's burning too much. Forests still need more fire. There's all of this different sort of landscape of fire that we could get into the nuances of. There are a lot of forests that would benefit from some amount of thinning, and there are a lot of forests that won't benefit at all from that. So, all of these nuances we could have gotten into more and more, but at the end of the day, just focus on the home out, not the forest in, and we'll solve this problem.
Yeah. And it was that was perfectly portrayed in that simulation in that big airport hangar, with the house split down the middle, connected. One was completely on fire, the other one was barely touched, and then they showed that couple who lived in the forest where the fire engulfed everything around it except for that land. And I was happy to hear that, I guess, California implemented some laws years ago, some of them, but it just seems like a no-brainer again, that this documentary should be seen by everybody. And it's like, oh, this is the way, as the Mandalorian would say, this is the way. What do you think about that?
Just that, how do we make it the way? How do we make it
How
real?
do we make it the way? How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, I think I think people are more and more realizing that almost in every landscape in the United States, and really globally, just that there's more and more fire. It's more and more of a concern, touching more and more people in diverse places, right? It's not just a California problem. It's not just a Colorado or Oregon problem. Gatlinburg, Tennessee, there were like a few thousand homes burned a few years ago. So that part, I think the understanding of that there is a problem is growing. And I really just think we have to keep saying this. I think we need neighbors who are concerned about fire danger to see the film and say, hey, all my other neighbors, I'm dependent on you if a fire comes, because if your home burns, it makes mine more likely to burn. Watch this film. Here's the resources, right? That's part of it. Sort of spreading virally in that way, I guess, if you will. But we also need policies that balance the carrot and the stick, right? We need to say it's more expensive to rebuild. It's more expensive to lose the tax base. It's more expensive to have to redo all the water systems. Let's just help people prepare their homes for fire and pay for that up front, because we will save money overall. And then, eventually we need the stick of people saying of some code that says you have to do this, right? That's how it's going to change. And I think it's constantly very difficult for political leaders to choose to spend money up front.
Yeah.
After a disaster, no one questions whether or not we should spend money to rebuild, but it's way more expensive. So yeah, we need some people to take some risks and say, let's prepare for this ahead of time.
Yeah.
And I think,
Awesome.
yeah, I think the more people that experience the loss, or experience a friend or a family member who experienced the loss, the more likely it's going to be that we actually invest in it. That tipping point is coming. It's inevitable. I hope it just comes sooner rather than later.
I hope so too. And I love in the film that there's a moment where one of the interview subjects, I can't remember her name, but this documentary helps you better understand fire and what it can do, what it doesn't do, and how you can gain from it. And that moment where you see a forest or an area devastated, all these different walks of life thrive in that. And the quote, which I love the quote because I've used it before, but unexpected beauty in these desolate or these otherwise unbeautified places. So during the making of this movie, besides that moment where animals were coming, did you have a moment or did you find unexpected beauty, whether within an interview subject or a land that you found?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, what changed the unexpected beauty for me, um, fire really helped me solidify this idea. But like humans, I think we're resistant to quick change. We don't mind slow change, but quick change is like, I knew what this area looked like. I used to go hiking there. Now it's burned, and I don't like that, right? But what shifted for me, and I think the unexpected beauty, is seeing that process as the thing that's beautiful. So knowing that forests have always burned and are always going to burn, and we're never going to stop that, and that the reason that we see these big, giant, beautiful forests or animals that live in them as beautiful is because they've gone through this process. So like rather than seeing the sort of outcome, the final result of the process as the thing that's beautiful, seeing the actual process itself as the beauty is something that like I learned from fire and that I try really hard to bring into the rest of my life, right? It's hard. It's hard, but like I have a toddler, I have a 2-year-old, right? It's like every day is process and there's never going to be an outcome. It's just going to be processed the whole time. And I think like a forest, like seeing that change is beautiful, right? And not being frustrated or have a specific expectation of this outcome where we've arrived. It's like, it's the journey, not the destination. It's a little bit of a it's cliche, but like, boy, if we can learn anything from nature, that's it, right? And be happier in our lives as a result.
Right, right, right. No, it's perfect, perfect. Also, the film is narrated by David Oyelowo, and I'm curious how that came to be. Like, did you listen to a lot of people? Did you have him in mind? Did you go through a casting process? Because I mean, his voice is so soothing and amazing. And
Yeah.
Add to that sub question, when you first heard his voice over your film, what was that experience like?
Well, okay, so I'll take the second part first. Like we in the studio, when I heard him say wildfire, I won't even try to begin to do it justice the way he does. Watch the film, listen to the first time he says wildfire. I just got like shivers up my spine, and I was just like, yes, this is like, that was a career moment for me. I was like, that was good. This was a good choice. And then, you see the film for the first time with the narration in, even unmastered, just like Sarah Quinn, my editor, just tossed it in. And I was just like, oh, we made a real film. Like this is a real, we made a movie. Because that was the very last thing to come together. And so those are just awesome moments. I mean, like I can't say enough good stuff about David, his skills, his voice, his talent. And I can't say enough about how happy I am that he got excited about this film, and he really wanted to put himself into it a bit. And part of that is that yeah, we listened to a lot of people, and we talked to a lot of people, and we said, here's our film, what do you think? And he was just like, well, look, I live in Tarzana neighborhood in LA. I back up to wildlands. I see fires every year. And yeah, I worry that one day, like if I can see this many fires, it's inevitable that one day my home will encounter a fire. and he was having some renovations done in his house, and he watched the film and he said, "Oh, I'm going to go talk to the contractors.
Mhm.
I'm going to start having some of this done to my house, you know?" And so just like the way that he understood it and so quickly and was like, "Ah, I get this. This makes sense. Let's do this." Um, just seemed like a perfect match, you know, really seemed like, "Oh, this is great. Like you live this in the way that so many people that watch the film and are in the film live it too." So yeah, I can't say enough things like good things about David and working with him too.
Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Also, like, man, how do you? I was directing a little bit in the first, you know, 2 paragraphs or whatever of the narration, and I was like, I'm just gonna shut up. This guy's killing it. And we had some, you know, there was of course some direction, but like, I just love what he brought to it.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful.
There's a reason he played Dr. King. He can deliver speeches.
You got that right.
Yep.
Nailed it.
Your investment, knowledge, and passion of all this is very clear and appreciated. But there's there's so many different things that are involved with climate change and all these. There's just so many layers and there's so many different aspects to it. Do you see yourself continuing to research and be invested in this particular arena, or does it just kind of like you'll check the pulse on it every now and then because you have more stories to tell? There's different areas you're likely going to focus, but what does your journey look like with this particular subject going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like so I have this great sort of outlet for my own sort of need to engage in this, which is this show that I produce or direct called Weathered. It's on PBS. We're in our 4th season, and it's just we're expanding it into a cool multi-platform. Um, we have a whole season of binging of it that's coming out Earth Day next year, right? So
Mm.
I'll be in the Arctic. I'll be kind of like all over the place, reporting on climate change, and but from the specific angle of like the climate is changing. How do we adapt in ways that makes it easier, you know, for us to make sure that it doesn't change more, right? How do we adapt, make ourselves safer, and hopefully reduce the amount of warming? Fire's part of that, right? Fire's part of this show. We look at sort of all of the different types of extreme weather, and how to understand them more deeply, how to understand what's coming. So that definitely like tickles the itch, I guess, for this. So I'm continuing to report on fire. In fact, we have an episode coming out about the first $1 trillion disaster. Where's that going to be? A lot of people think it might be a fire, and there's a specific even like neighborhood and region in California that a lot of insurance folks are looking at. Developing the insurance side of it, developing sort of the rest of the like prep side of it is a lot of what I'm working on now, in that way. But in terms of future features, in terms of like even you know this size of a project, it'll almost certainly be climate, but it'll probably be a slightly different aspect of it than fire. We'll see.
Mm.
We'll
No,
see.
I think that's cool because, you know, watching some of the weathered stuff on PBS that you did, even like a recent show on like a green energy grid.
Hmm.
I wanted to like take everybody in Texas, the powers that be, and force them to watch that because remember 2 years ago, the powers that be shut down Texas during the coldest few days and decades, and where Texas was colder than Alaska. And I'm just it was insane. So
Yes,
I
it
love
truly
that you're
was.
I'm glad that you're doing this and highlighting things that we need to see and do to prevent and understand better.
Yeah, well, and you're in such an interesting place, right? Texas holds this fascinating superlative, right, in electricity. Like the fact that the Texas grid is very unregulated and is only Texas
Yeah, it's crazy.
makes it very vulnerable. And separately, also you have and are putting in more renewable energy than any other state in the United States, right? So it's like man, if we could only just get just enough regulation to make it work, you'll have the best grid in the country soon. I mean, hopefully, it's just like small tweaks that need to happen. So good job, Texas, in some ways, but oh God, can we just get the rest of it together?
Right, right.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I know we're just about out of time, but I want to make sure that everybody who's listening to this has the opportunity to know like where they can watch this documentary, and along with the other future projects that you have, where you want to be found,
Yeah.
if you want people to engage in a dialogue with you, because
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
that's just as valuable to you as making some of these films.
Absolutely. I love the dialogue. I also look, this is one of the only, I love this film in this funny way because it's great for you to see it and it's great for you to do the things to your home, but you really also need your neighbors to do those things. So
Right.
so watch it and share it with your neighbors as well. But
Community viewing party.
exactly. Yes, that's right. Totally. But yeah, so it streams on June 13th on Apple and Amazon as well. But go to elementalfilm.com and click the link, the streaming link. It'll take you right there. Elementalfilm.com, June 13th. Also, holler at me on Instagram, especially Trip Jennings Video is my handle, and engage with us through the website. I mean, elementalfilm.com. We check all of the email. We love getting email from folks. People are constantly like, oh, I want to show this at my, this club, that club, this group. We love that. Holler at us and we'll help you make it happen. And keep that conversation going. So yeah, thanks so much for your time. This has been a fun interview.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have one last question for you.
Please.
So it's obvious in your work that you take the cinematic approach to telling these stories. Are there any particular scenes in any documentaries or films that have inspired you and stuck with you that help shape you creatively going into these?
I mean, yeah, like
Tell me some of them.
I think about David Attenborough every time I'm writing almost any of this. Like I just so inspirational to me, and like obviously like every part of planet Earth is just so it's sort of the peak of visual storytelling in this arena, right? So I'm always sort of like, what would DA say right here? That's actually the quote that goes through my head. It's like it's the cinematic, and I know you asked about the cinematic aspect of it, but for me it's like every shot should be telling a story, right? So it starts with like, what would DA say right here, and how am I going to explain that visually through the camera, and so yeah, I mean that's kind of always been my inspiration and probably always will be.
I like that. And do you ever have like an antithesis to David Attenborough where you're like Werner Herzog and you're like chaos reigns in this kind of thing?
I mean, those are the two most quoted directors in my house. My wife and I are constantly speaking to each other in their voices. So like, yes, you nailed it. But yeah, I think the mix, I mean, David Attenborough, I feel like, he's like every story that has ever been told has already been told through nature, right? And then like Werner Herzog is just like every story in nature is actually about the human experience. And I think like that cocktail between, is just always mixing up in my mind, just being like, oh, if you can bring those two things together, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. Have you met either one?
No. I had some shots. I like finally had some shots in a show that was narrated by David Attenborough, and I was just like, made my heart sing.
Oh, there was some pain behind that. No, we got to make this happen.
I know, right? Yeah.
We'll be hopeful. All right.
Totally.
Well, thank you so incredibly much. This was a very thoughtful conversation, very thoughtful film, and we can't wait to spread the word. So thank you again so much. We know you have a lot of great work ahead of you. We look forward to seeing it.
Thanks. thanks to you all for the time, and can't wait to chat more with all the listeners on the online.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cheers.
Trip.
Take care.